Episode 75 of the Fired Coaches podcast. Interested to have Coach Scott Wachenheim here on the podcast, who is a longtime college football coach, spent nearly 40 years in coaching, Air Force grad, served in our armed forces, so appreciate that out of him. Won the Eddie Robinson Coach of the Year, multiple Coach of the Years within the SoCon Conference when he was at VMI. He spent time at Air Force, Arkansas, Colorado, Utah State, Rice, Liberty, with the Redskins in the NFL, now the Commanders. Spent some time at Virginia before getting the head job at VMI. Has a son in coaching, and so really excited to kind of dive into this episode with Coach Scott Wachenham. So Scott, I appreciate you taking some time here before this holiday weekend.
Yeah, Marcus, I appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess take us back to the early days of you deciding to go to Air Force, being a civil engineer. I mean, obviously going to Air Force and being a civil engineer, that seems like really two tough things at once. So, I mean, what was kind of the motive to go and join the Air Force?
So it's interesting, I was playing football out in California and, I was pretty good. I had a lot of recruiting activity going on, but in the end, when it came to scholarship time, I only had two scholarship offers, one to the Air Force Academy, one to Cal State Northridge, which has since dropped football. And then I was exploring going to a junior college, Saddleback Junior College. And I went on the trip to Cal State Northridge and just didn't really feel welcome. And I went on the visit to the Air Force Academy, and I just said, wow, this is an opportunity to play Division I football, play against Notre Dame. Never thought about serving my country before, but I just wanted the opportunity to play football at its highest level, and there was no guarantee if I went to junior college that would happen. So, on the official visit, I said I could do this, but, when I got there, it was a little different experience than what I expected. As far as civil engineering, I wanted to major in physical therapy and be a physical therapist, but at the academy, you could only go pre-med, and I was not real good at memorizing information and regurgitating, but I was pretty good at working through math formulas. And so I got into engineering, and civil engineering was the broadest base. Haven't used it much other than, the learning style of progressive learning, but that's I kind of fell into both.
Talk about Colorado Springs, Colorado. I've been there once. This was years ago, visiting my dad's buddy. Seems like an absolute beautiful area. So just kind of talk about that area.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place as long as you're not out there in the dead of winter, standing at attention at 6 a.m. at the terrazzo while the Star Spangled Banner is being played and the American flags being raised, and the wind is coming off the flat irons, and you're wearing those wool pants that are pulling the hair out of your legs. But no, it is beautiful.
I feel like you don't remember that at all.
Like it was yesterday. The academy is beautiful. I enjoyed my time there. The friends I met are lifetime friends. Coach Hatfield was the head coach who I spent 17 years of my life with, either playing for or working for. So I'm just so thankful to God and grateful that I went there. I think it changed my life. I think it allowed me to be the man I was to be, and thankful for the opportunity and the way things worked out.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit more of how you kind of got into coaching before you left there, before you did your service tour and everything like that. But since you brought up Coach Hatfield, I mean, talk about that. I mean, you said 17 years, you played there at Air Force, you followed him at, Arkansas, at Rice. I mean, talk about like what his impact has meant to you on kind of your life and just your coaching philosophy and all that.
Yeah. So my senior year, we went 10-2, beat Notre Dame. I went to a bowl game, won the bowl game. That was against Ole Miss that year, back-to-back bowl games, back-to-back wins over VMI. So Coach Hatfield was blessed to get the Arkansas job. The only reason I stayed back and coached at the Air Force Academy is they asked me to, and I had no idea what I really wanted to do, and pilot training wasn't going to start till January. So when Coach DeBerry took over, he asked me to stay. I did. Pilot training.
What was it about you that, like, where it was like, we want you to stay? Like, what did they see in you?
I don't know. You'd have to ask Coach DeBerry, but I was a 4-year starter in the offensive line, and I did, was known as an intellectual player. So I, understood more than just the line part of football. So I think that had something to do with it. And so I stayed. I was basically a graduate assistant, but we had a JV team at that time, and I was the JV offensive coordinator and O-line coach, and fell in love in coaching. And then when I went off the pilot training in January, I did well in the T-37, but did not do well in the 38 and washed out of pilot training. And so I finished my Air Force career in Space Command. before they had Space Force, and worked on in Holloman Air Force Base for most of that and deploying. But then when I wanted to be done with my Air Force career, I wanted to become a coach, and I called Coach Hatfield, who was still at Arkansas, and as fate had it, he was losing 5 graduate assistants, and he tried to talk me out of it 3 times, but I decided to go coach for him. And as a graduate assistant, my first son Kyle was born, and we immediately qualified for welfare. We didn't take it; we should have. But you didn't make a lot of money as a graduate assistant back then. It was a little bit different entrance into college football, and it was went from a captain in the Air Force, financially secure, to qualifying for welfare. But Coach Hatfield, just unbelievable impact in my life. Him and my father. I spent 17 years at home before I went to the Air Force Academy, and I spent 17 years with Coach Hatfield. Coach Hatfield is probably as big a reason that I'm a Christian. I was born and raised Jewish and accepted Christ my senior year at the Air Force Academy. I
Wow.
think the culture that Coach Hatfield built there was one of the biggest reasons. The other were 2 teammates, Marty Laughlin and Dennis Moore, just lived the Christian life in a way that I, wanted to live my life. Oh, he had a big impact that way. Coach gave me my first coaching job at Arkansas. First of all, he gave me my only Division I scholarship at Air Force. Gave me my first coaching job as a graduate assistant at Arkansas. Hired me at Rice from Utah State to be the O-line coach, and promoted me to offensive coordinator. And just the way he lived life every day, and the way he coached his players, and the way he coached his coaches just made me want to be more like him. And I felt if I could ever be a coach and man like him, that I would be pretty high in life and living a successful life.
Impactful. That's great stuff. Going back to before you joined Coach Hatfield at Arkansas as a graduate assistant, in your time through service, being that you had a little bit of coaching before you left, I mean, was that constantly on your mind of like, I really, once this is done, like, I definitely want to do this. Like, that's no doubt about it. When I get out of the service, I'm definitely going to get into coaching.
No, not really. First set out to be a pilot, and I am a very focused guy, and pilots have to have more peripheral vision. And I just wasn't very good at it. I would be studying all night while my friends were out going out, having a good time. We would have a ride the next day. They'd get an outstanding, and I'd just get a satisfactory. And I just wasn't naturally gifted. My oldest son is an A-10 pilot, so at least somebody was. So it's not genetic. It's just that didn't fit me and what I did well. So I originally thought I'd be a career pilot, and then when that happened, I got it. When that didn't happen, I thought I'd be in the Air Force for 20 years and then retire and do something. But I got married, and I was deployed for 5 months, and my next job in the Air Force was going to have me gone for a year. And I just didn't want to be away from my wife that much so early in our marriage. Really never, to be honest. And so it was real simple. I interviewed at a lot of places, but my wife, Carla, asked me one day, well, what do you really want to do? And I said, I really want to coach. And she said, well, why don't you do that? I said, because we're not going to make a lot of money, at first. And she said, that's okay. We'll make it through. And we did. It wasn't easy. There were times, we were eating ramen noodles 3 or 4 times a week with, frozen corn and peas. We did make it, and it worked out well.
So you're a GA at Arkansas for Coach Hatfield, like you're talking about. You also, I believe, was a GA considered a GA at Colorado as well, too. For Coach.
Right. So after year one, Coach Hatfield left Arkansas to go to Clemson. He asked me to go, and Carla was pregnant with our first son, Kyle. I was close to getting my master's degree, which back then in coaching, if you were going to coach at a lower level, you had to have a master's. So I wanted to finish. And Coach Crow, who took over as the head coach at Arkansas, asked me to stay, and I did. And then I didn't have a job, and I went to the convention and was talking with Pete Shinnick, who's now the head coach at Towson. We were GAs year one together in Arkansas. And he had played at Colorado, knew that there was a job opening. So I saw Bill McCartney walking in the AFCA convention. I just walked up, introduced myself, told him I heard he had a GA job open and I wanted it. And so he said, okay, we'll interview you tomorrow. And so I interviewed, they offered me the job. I took it and went to Colorado, was a graduate assistant for Bill McCartney, Gary Barnett on that staff, a lot of great coaches, Ron Vanderlinden, the list goes on and on. I can name a bunch of them, but that was a great experience before I got my first full-time gig at Utah State.
What was it like seeing, that early success? I mean, at Arkansas, I believe you saw some Cotton Bowls, if not one of them. Colorado, I believe that year you were there, you guys won the Big Eight. What do you think that had as an influence on you, seeing that success at such a young age in your coaching career?
Well, the first thing started as a player. At Air Force, we were 2-9-1 my freshman year, and then my senior year we were 10-2 and 13th ranked in the nation. So seeing that as a player, I got to see it again as a coach, kind of in reverse, because at Arkansas we were 10-2 year one with Coach Hatfield, Cotton Bowl, lost to UCLA and Troy Aikman. But the next year we were 3-8 with Jack Crow, and just seeing the differences of how programs were expectations, how players live up to expectations, and then going from Arkansas to Colorado and Bill McCartney in a totally different way of running things and the way Gary Barnett things. I think they were hugely impactful in my coaching career, and especially being a head coach more than even an assistant coach. One of the best books I ever read in coaching is Taking the Purple to Pasadena by Gary Barnett, and it to me was a blueprint for success that I tried to follow, even though VMI was a totally different experience, similar to Northwestern, but different because of the military aspect and lack of finances to reach the recruiting levels that they did.
I actually love that. I was actually just, when I moved here, I was actually just looking because I have that book and that's one of my favorite books. I mean, you want to talk about taking a place where, how old the carpet was in the offices and all the different types of stuff he mentions in there. It's a great book.
It is a great book. I think every coach should read it. So I think that was hugely impactful. You know, one thing I'll talk about now, and maybe I'll talk about later, but I think you have to overpromise in order to overdeliver, and I got bad advice my first year at BMI from the chief fundraiser, and he says, "Hey, just don't promise anything." And I kind of took it. And it wasn't until year 5 where I said, no, man, it was 2019. And the theme I said to all the boosters and the players was, it's winning time and 1-9. And, we won 5 games that year, which for VMI is like, going to the Super Bowl. But, I think you have to do that. You have to create that positive vision and not be scared to fail and not be scared to overpromise. And I think Kirk Cignetti signifies that more than anybody when he went to Indiana and he said Purdue sucks, and so does Michigan and Ohio State. And everybody was in an uproar. But if he didn't say it, I don't think he would have won. So I do think that's a critical part of coaching as a head coach, especially if you're taking over at a place that has not experienced success.
No, I think that's actually a great point. I mean, obviously, everybody's heard the halftime speech and then the Google Me and stuff like that he had. And in some ways, it's kind of like, well, like you said, overpromise, right? Like at the end of the day, if I don't do well here, I'm going to get let go or whatever's going to happen. But like, I'm just going to tell you what I think we can do, right? You kind of like you create that inner belief.
Correct. And, you're going to get fired, win or lose anyway, eventually. But I did, one thing I did as good as any coach in the world is I started off 6-38 and kept my job, Marcus. So there is some ways to stay employed even when things aren't going well. Now, I was at a program that was used to only winning 2 games a year, but there are some things you have to do as a head coach when you aren't having success. One of them is be extremely positive, and the second thing is listen to everybody. And it's amazing where sometimes good ideas come from, where they're least expected if you truly listen. And that's all alumni and fundraisers and boosters and fans really want you to do is actually listen to what they're saying. And then if you do what they think is right, that's great. But if you don't and they know you listen, they're willing to accept your decisions.
Yeah. Talk about before you went to Rice and joined Coach Hatfield again. You spent a few years out in Logan, Utah, at Utah State. I think Gary Patterson might have been on that staff with you out there. Just talk about what you remembered. I think you were involved with a few different position groups there with offensive line, tight ends, and whatnot. What do you remember from your 2 years in Logan?
Well, it's my first full-time job, which was really exciting to get to go on the road recruiting, to actually be in charge of position group. Jim Zorn, who was the guy who hired me at the Washington Redskins, was the offensive coordinator. Charlie Weatherby, who was at Arkansas with Jack Crow as the OC, was the head football coach. Dick Bumpus was the defensive coordinator, and Gary Patterson was the secondary coach. It was great being in Logan. Our offices are nothing like Logan is today. We were in an old sorority building was where our offices were, but it was exciting. Every day was a learning experience. I was a tight ends coach, recruiting coordinator, and, I helped out with the offensive tackles as well. And I enjoyed it. We went to work every day with an energy. We had success. We beat BYU for the first time in a long time. We won the Big West Championship and went to the Las Vegas Bowl and won that game. We started off 1-5 and then won 6 games in a row. So again, just the power of positive thinking, which Charlie Weatherby is the most positive head football coach I was ever associated with. He would always, point out the positives and think we're going to win, and that helped out immensely. And again, Gary was a unbelievable help in recruiting. Gary Patterson, I will tell people, is one of the best evaluators of talent in the recruiting market. I think he proved that as head coach at TCU. Obviously he's a defensive, one of the top defensive coaches and minds out there in football. And I'm really excited to see what he does at USC. I think he'll really help that program. They're my dark horse to win the Big Ten this year. It was great coaching with Gary. Tremendous knowledge of California recruiting, and I recruited California since I grew up there, and we hit it off really well. And I enjoyed my time with him. We used to have parties at my house after the game for the coaches, and he would come over, play his guitar, and it was a great time.
How far, I should know this, how far is Logan, from California? I mean, obviously I know California is big, but I mean, how far until you get to actually some decent roots of recruiting bases and things like that from Logan?
Utah football is better than what people think. It's just you have to deal with a lot of the young men are going on missions, and they're going to go for 2 years. So once you learn how to deal with that, you can really get a lot of your team from Utah. Yeah, I don't know the actual driving distance. I know it was a 2-hour drive to Salt Lake City, and then about an hour flight to
Sure.
wherever we were going in California, and then we'd head out on the road recruiting. Think they've expanded the airport in Logan now, and you can fly out of Logan. But at the time, didn't really think about it much because I didn't drive it. I always flew it.
Yeah, I got a college a classmate who I was really close with, who played on the baseball team when I was playing basketball, and he's actually an assistant athletic director out there for fundraising. And just the stuff that I've seen, I believe it's a lot different than maybe what it was, in the early '90s and things like that. You mentioning about Coach Weatherby being so positive. Do you think he was really far ahead of his time, considering, back in the day it was, I don't want to say like, coaches were just always on people and things like that, but the positive of, coaching and things like that really has picked up obviously in the last decade. Do you think he was kind of further ahead of his time in that regard?
I really do. I hadn't thought about it until you asked me the question, Marcus. So I think it's a great question of it. But I think Coach Weatherby actually took a lot of gruff for how positive he was all the time, that people thought he needed to be harder, on players. Maybe me too at the time. I don't remember what I thought, um, but he was a really a positive thinker and probably ahead of his time. Yeah.
Yeah, so then you spend 12 years at Rice. And again, I mean, obviously in coaching, right? That's a lifetime. Joining Coach Hatfield again, coaching position groups, you got to move up to offensive coordinator, which I think you mentioned earlier here in the episode. You know, Jumping in with him, obviously after playing for him and then being at Arkansas with that short 1 year stint, was it just symmetry where you just jump in and you just kind of know what to expect from him, or is it completely different because you are a full-time coach with maybe a little bit more on your plate than what you had as a player for him and then as a GA?
Well, Marcus, I went there as an offensive line coach first, and David Lee was the offensive coordinator, I think, for 9 of those years. And then David went to the Dallas Cowboys, and that's when Coach Hatfield promoted him to the offensive coordinator, offensive line coach. I knew what to expect from Coach Hatfield, so that wasn't any big of a change. And the difference was Houston, Texas, and actually having to deal with driving to work. I grew up in LA, so I was used to freeway traffic, but not going to and from work every day. So just organizing your schedule based on the traffic flow was a huge change there. I knew the offense like the back of my hand because it was wishbone football and I played in it. And, it was really exciting to work with David, who, was coming from being the head coach at UTEP, and it didn't go well for him. And we were actually roommates for the first month we lived in Houston. And so I got to learn a lot from David and, and what he went through and things he may have done differently and things to look forward to when you are a head coach at a program that isn't used to winning. But no, things were pretty much lockstep. The hardest thing was recruiting Texas when you're not from there. And you don't talk like that and people don't know you, and you have to earn your keep when you're doing Texas recruiting. They want a guy that's going to do the things that they expect out of a coach. And I recruited the same area for 12 years, Katy, Texas, San Antonio, and Austin, and everywhere, out, on the way to those places. And I really got some great relationships with high school coaches during that time. So that was the biggest adjustment for me, was recruiting Texas, totally different than recruiting California or anywhere else I recruited.
I mean, is it true, like when you were kind of indoctrinated into, Texas football is, I mean, Friday Night Lights obviously is the drama, but Is everything really, I mean, when you go to, any town in Texas down there, is it really just that big of a deal where it's like football, 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 and that's what everybody breathes from the high school level?
The small, towns, definitely, like the 2A, 3A schools, when you go to a game on Friday night, they shut down the whole city. I mean, it's just the lights are on. And I'll never forget, I was recruiting Shane Leckler to be an option quarterback at Rice, and to hear him kick and punt the ball, I went, wow, this guy is, this guy's going to be special punter and kicker. And he turned out to have a great career, but when he punted and kicked, I mean, it was like somebody shot off a cannon in that small stadium. But you drive there and all the lights would be off except for the lights in the stadium. So you didn't have GPS back then. You had to use a map. But back in those days, the lights would take you right to the stadium. So it was different. The commitment coaching in Texas is way above the states that I recruited in other than Georgia. The head coach is in the school. Most of the assistants are in the school. They have an athletic period year round. Those coaches are paid at a level that they can afford to do nothing but coach. It's a lot different and a lot higher, and they get fired. I had 112 schools to recruit in San Antonio and Austin and Katy. And when I left after 12 years, only 12 of those 112 coaches were the same.
Wow.
They had all been, fired or moved on to other jobs. And the pressure's really harder in the small towns because, there's only one school, one ISD, and you better perform or they're going to have a meeting and get you out of town and get the next one in.
Everybody's got the answers, right?
Well, that's one thing about coaching. Everybody knows how to do it better than you. So that's just part of it. But that's what also makes it fun.
Yeah. You had talked about the wishbone, and I believe you also ran the air raid when you were at VMI. I guess question to you, do you think that we ever see things go backwards again? Obviously, we still see a little bit of the triple option at some of the service academies, and the wishbone's kind of non-existent. But do we ever see that come back to where it's like, I look at it from a basketball lens, and we played the Grinnell system, which is now it's obviously there's a lot of 3-point shooting, but it's a very fast pace, kind of gamble defensively, shoot a lot of threes, and it's all based on analytics, right? If we shoot this many threes and, yada, 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 we can win. And what I was always fascinated in playing them is because they did it differently than anybody else. So you shut down your whole week basically from practice to focus on what they're doing. And so, do we ever see things go back to the way it was within football, or is, just kind of the air raid and the spread game kind of here to stay?
Well, nobody's really running the true triple anymore. Most of their options are predetermined. A lot of quarterback run game I see when I watch Navy, Army, and Air Force play. You don't see the true midline being run. You don't see the true triple being run near like when, I played and we did it. I don't think you'll see that as a comeback. It takes a lot of time to practice. And again, I love watching the fullback go up the middle, but most fans do not. And when you run true option football, they can't follow the ball. So, it's kind of moved to the shotgun version of it. And then they give you the under center triple to give the illusion that they're running it, I think, and then to make you prepare for it a little bit. But, when I was at VMI, Citadel was running it, Brent Thompson, but they were predetermined in most of their under center option stuff. So the true read, I think, may be gone. Not sure. You never know, but I don't think it's coming back anytime soon. I just don't.
Well, what did you feel when you got promoted to offensive coordinator? I think it was 2001.
Well, you don't really run the offense and call your plays with Coach Hatfield. I mean, he's still heavily involved in the offense, and he's still, the 3 years I was there, he probably called over half the games. I called maybe half of them, but I did get him influence there. At that time, Kevin Wilson was at Northwestern, and they were really doing a great job. And I got Coach Hatfield to come visit with me and some of the offensive staff. And that year we went up to Northwestern. We ended up not staying in the true under center wishbone, but getting in the shotgun and running some zone read and some throw stuff. And we had one of our best seasons at Rice in the history. I think we had back-to-back, we won 7 and then 8, in those 2 years when I first took over as OC and before having another tough year. But, that was fun. So I did influence the offense and getting him to go visit Northwestern and adapt some of that spread stuff and running some of the no huddle offense from the option. Not all, but some, because Chan Gailey had worked for him and won a national championship with no huddle triple option at Troy. Coach was open to that. And he let me call plays. And I remember the first time I called plays, David Lee called me. He said, how'd you get to do that? He's never let anybody call plays for him. I said, well, he let Jack Crow call him the year I was there. So that's not true, but it was a great evolution. I've probably one of the rare coaches is, I started off as a triple option offensive lineman when I got into coaching. And then when I got into coaching at Arkansas, we were the I formation with Jack Crow and ran the I triple and, toss sweep and threw the ball out of the I, some power I stuff. Then I went to Utah State and we run the Dennis Erickson one back, no back Miami offense for 2 years. Then Rice to the flex bone and adapt some of the Kevin Wilson spreads stuff. Then I go to Liberty and, we get a transfer in there by the name of Rashad Jennings. And so we run the West Coast offense where we're, handing the ball. I kind of call it the East Coast because we were run first, pass second. We had West Coast passing concepts. Brandon Streeter was my quarterback coach. I was the OC and O-line coach and did that. Then I went to the NFL, which was West Coast with Jim Zorn, true West Coast. And then back to Virginia, which was we had Bill Lazors, the OC, which was the Don Coryell San Diego offense, which is a different type of offense that's NFL driven and throwing the ball. And then went to VMI and we were an RPO team for 3 years there. And, we just weren't good enough at it. The first year we had success with doing that offensively, but then people caught up to us, you got to do something different or you got to do something better. And so I studied and I said, I can either go the triple option or I listened to Mike Leach. The air raid offense was just like the triple option, or we can go to the air raid. For recruiting reasons, I chose the air raid. I thought it was easier to, recruit a slot receiver than a slot running back, especially when we would recruit over 60% of our players from the state of Virginia to field a full scholarship football team. So that was the air raid part of it. But I think you have to do something different. I think you have to be unique. You have to make it fit the people that you can recruit, especially if you're not at a place that recruit different things. You mentioned your basketball style. A part of the reason we went no huddle as fast as we could go air raid was the success Duger Balcom was having on the basketball court at BMI with his, take chances defensively, shoot more threes,
and that's basically the Grinnell
stuff.
system. Yep.
Yeah. So we did that because I felt at VMI we could be in better shape than our opponent and tougher mentally. And so if we tired them out, we would have a better chance to win. So similar philosophies that way.
I believe it was November of 2005, Coach Hatfield had resigned and stepped down. At that point, obviously that's kind of the first time you've seen, a change. Obviously, Coach Hatfield had left and you'd seen a little bit of the shift at Arkansas with philosophy and structure and all that kind of stuff. What did you feel like at that point? When the Rice journey kind of comes to an end at the end of 2005 there?
Well, I had a wife and 2 kids and I got to find a job. And so, I went through my contact list A to Z, calling people, every day just to see what was going on, if they had anything open, if they knew or anything. Actually, Tim Tickle, who, big in AFCA, so a lot of coaches might know him. He was the head coach at Terry High School down the street. And I had an offer that I could go work for Tim and stay in the same house. But as I went through my contact list, I got to Ron Vanderlinden, who I worked with at Colorado. And Ron, didn't have anything, but he said he knew Danny Rocco had a spot at Liberty. And he also knew another coach that had something. He'd give my name to both. And he gave me both their numbers. And I, called Danny and he answered the phone. And so that was crazy. A new head coach answering the phone. So we talked. I was driving to Rice University actually to clean out my office. And we talked for 30 minutes. And, he had the dreaded end line, hey, send me your resume. So I did. I thought I got no chance of getting a job here because, once they give you the send your resume deal, you're done. But
this is either going to go in the recycling bin or a file, right? One of the two.
Exactly. But luckily for me, he asked me out there to interview. I interviewed, and I think I was his 4th choice, and the first 3 said no. So I got the job at Liberty, which when I took it, Liberty's an FCS school and 1AA back at the time. And all my friends and coaches says, "What are you doing? Why are you taking that job?" I go, "You got one for me?" I mean, so anyway, it ended up being I loved my time at Liberty, and that was awesome. So yeah, it was, I think when you're on a staff where the head coach retires, gets fired, and you're an assistant, you got to have a plan in place for how you're going to move forward. And you can't expect to be retained by the next head coach at Rice. As a matter of fact, I had talked with a couple of guys that were interviewing for that job. I knew them, and I knew that I wasn't going to stay with them when they took the jobs because they needed to start over and build a winning program. Anyway, my advice to any guys who are on a staff is always have a plan that if things end where you're at, that you have at least a plan for how you're going to move forward. And, the same thing happened when Coach Zorn got fired from the Washington Redskins. I went through the same process and, landed with Mike London at Virginia. And, the unique thing for me is I did not know Danny Rocco other than meeting him once on the road recruiting. And I did not know Mike London except for, maybe meeting him on the road once or twice recruiting. And I was able to get jobs because I get a good job for people I work for, and then people that knew me that could recommend me to those people and get me in front of them and give me an opportunity.
And so when you were at Liberty, I mean, offensive coordinator, you guys had some success. You kept climbing the ladder in terms of wins. I mean, I think you won 10 games in that last year, were ranked FCS at that time. Like you mentioned, Jim Zorn, who you had a previous relationship with, out at Utah State. You joined the Redskins in that 2009 season. And as you mentioned, he's kind of let go after a 4-12 year. Even though it was a short stint in the NFL, I mean, did you enjoy the NFL kind of side of things as opposed to the recruiting and everything else that you do as a college coach? Or was it just something where after that season ended, not in such a good way, was it like, no, I really want to get back to my roots of college football?
I love the NFL. It was awesome. The guys you're coaching, they're like fifth-year seniors, the worst ones. You draw it on the board, you talk to them one time, they can go out there and do it on the field. They work extremely hard at their craft. There's very few, and those are the ones you read about, that mess up and don't do things the right way. 99.9% of them are true professionals because they know they're not going to make $1 million+ a year doing anything else, and they know their time is limited, and they're trying to maximize their time. And all they wanted to know from me was, how can you help me stay in the league? And I was blessed to coach Chris Cooley, who I'm still friends with today.
Yeah,
Todd
what
Yoder.
was that? What was that like? I know he got hurt during that year, but I mean, he was an absolute animal when he was at his peak.
Yeah, he was awesome. Truly highly intelligent football player. Just a pleasure to coach. Worked hard, challenging it sometimes because he was smart enough to know when things weren't being done in what he believed was the best way. And so my challenge as a coach, when I generally agreed with him. And, I just had to, find a way to support the people that were making the decisions that he was against, and in a way that he didn't lose respect for me, and that he would understand that this is why we were doing certain things certain ways. But also, when he was 100% right, I had to fight with the people above me to get things changed. So I enjoyed that. Chris was awesome. I remember when I first moved in my rent house, he came over, picked up my two sons, took them around Virginia for the day. Again, as a coach, you're gone from home sometimes a lot, more so during recruiting, but they get some benefits like being water boy for the team at the University of Texas when you play them, and Chris Cooley driving them around. And when we beat Florida State at Virginia, we beat Miami and Florida back-to-back, first time in Virginia history on the road. My oldest son was able to be on the sidelines of Florida State, which is one of the best places to play a football game. But I loved it. I would have stayed in the NFL the rest of my career, and I would have gone back if I had the opportunity at any time, because I just think it's pure football. When I went in there, I put my cell phone in my drawer and wouldn't look at my phone until I got back out. When I got back in Virginia, I had my phone on 24/7. You have two phones, one personal phone, one recruiting phone, and you could be watching a basketball game and you have 5 text conversations going on with recruits. Recruiting never ends, so that's just especially at that level. But the NFL is purely football. You actually have more time, even though the season's longer. You don't go on the road recruiting, so you're always sleeping in your own bed. Again, I think as a coach, if you're efficient, you can organize your time to be home when your kids are home and work when they're sleeping. In the NFL, your hard work days are on days other than Thursdays and Fridays. As a week gets on, you have more time. So Friday, Saturdays, unless you're playing an away game, you have more time to go to your Friday night football game with your kid. Never a problem in the NFL. And in college, well, shoot, I might have to go recruit. Which again, another shout out to Mike London. He always let me go to my son's game and recruit those games when I worked for him. But the NFL is great. Unfortunately, we weren't very good. You better have a quarterback. He not only has to have a strong arm and be accurate, he has to be decisive, and he has to be unafraid of making mistakes. And I think the most underrated position in the NFL, not because I spend a lot of time coaching it, is the offensive line. It's not sexy to draft offensive linemen, but the teams that have the best O-line are generally playing because they keep the quarterback upright. They can run the ball and do all the things necessary to win. Some things I learned in the NFL, when Coach Zorn left, I got to interview with Coach Shanahan twice. I had an opportunity to stay if the guy he offered the job before he took it. He had two options, John Embry, who I knew from my time at Colorado, but John took the job. If John had decided to take the job with the Buffalo Bills, I could have stayed with Washington and would have stayed there. But God worked it all just fine. And I'm thankful for my 1 year in the NFL because I think that made me a better head football coach.
Yeah, so you spent 5 years, like you mentioned, with Mike London at Virginia, doing some tight end offensive line stuff, and then I believe it was 2015, you had gotten the VMI job. And what was that opportunity like? Do you feel like, again, VMI being a military institute, obviously you got the Air Force background, you've kind of taken some hard jobs, right? You're at Rice, which is a great institution. Virginia, a great institution. I feel like there's a lot of parallels in your career of where you worked at institutions where high academics or military type service. Did you feel like that prepared you, a ton to take that VMI role? Because I mean, I've read online where the work that you did at VMI, like that's one of the toughest football and basketball jobs in the country.
Well, I think God uniquely prepared me for the VMI job. I think, going to the Air Force Academy and serving in the Air Force and getting the military background, served me extremely well. I think working at academic schools that had limited financial resources like Rice and, Virginia at the time, we were not resource like the rest of the ACC when I was there. I know they've upgraded in a lot of areas since then. Having spent all the time in the state of Virginia to recruit Virginia, I think was unique. And then the offensive, eclectic experience I've had, I thought helped me get to a point where we could get to the right point eventually at VMI offensively. And then, the positivity of Charlie Weatherby, the motivational ability of Bill McCartney, the organizational abilities that Danny Rocco taught me, and then, Ken Hatfield, just the overall leadership lessons that I learned every day from him, I think put me in a position to have success, although we didn't have success, initially there. The time with Mike London was great. I enjoyed it, but I wanted to be a head coach. I took a significant pay cut to go from, UVA to VMI. And again, I talked with my wife, Carla, about it, and you got to have a great wife if you're going to be a coach. I think you got to have a great wife anyway. She was very supportive of going there. And, we thought about it this way, you're not supposed to swing at the high fastball because it's chocolate cake. It looks good, but it's not good for you. But we said, hey, we're going to swing at it. We're going to swing hard. And if we hit out of the park, great. If we strike out, we'll figure it out from there.
So what's it like building a program at a military institute like that? Again, obviously everybody knows about the Air Force and the Navy and the Army and all those things, but what really is it like building at a Virginia Military Institute? I mean, what do you kind of go about? You had mentioned earlier, which I know you talked in a previous podcast too, about the in-state players and scholarships and things like that. What is kind of your message going out to, prospective students and their families when you're talking about bringing a kid to VMI?
Well, Ashley Ingram's going to do a great job. I actually think he's perfectly suited as well. Having spent as much time at Navy, his dad is a football coach, so he comes from a coaching background. I think going back to the option is huge. I didn't do the option at first at VMI because the league was option oriented. Citadel was running the option. Furman was running a version of it. Wofford was running it, and it was a run-oriented league except for Sanford and Chris Hatcher. So, we went to the air raid to be different than everybody else. And, now everybody's throwing the ball in the SoCon. So I think VMI going back to the option, I think it's the exactly right thing that Ashley's doing and the VMI leadership. And, I think Ashley is a recruiter, which you got to be a great recruiter at VMI. And you have to, I think if they're getting him more money for, giving them some NIL money and some incentives to keep fifth years there and the ability to recruit out of state more than I had. I think what I would say when you're building a program at a military school, Jeff Monken and Brian Newberry did a great job at it. Paul Johnson did a great job at Navy, Ken Hatfield and Fisher DeBerry at Air Force, Troy Calhoun at Air Force. I think you got to say, hey, we got to do something different and hopefully do something different and something better. We got to look at the kids that we can recruit. It was my first time being a head coach. I think Ashley's a step ahead of me, having the experience at being a head coach prior at Carson Newman. I think that's helpful because I think it takes a couple years of being the head man to really realize all the decisions that you're making and all the people you're impacting and influencing. So I think you build the program based on your experience, but you got to have the right players and you got to have the right staff. At VMI, there were some things that I didn't quite know as a head coach that were difficult. And, when you don't have the salary pool to get the staff that you thought you could hire, you have to have a method for hiring new coaches that are gifted, and you have to understand they're going to leave you every 2 years, because if you hire the best young coaches, they're going to do well and they're going to move on. So that's a big understanding you got to have. And you got to know the budget that you have for recruiting, especially when in-state and out-state tuition costs are different levels. And how do I get the best players here? How do I keep them here? And you got to be able to remain positive during defeat. And you got to do all the little things to keep your job while you're building the program. You got to go to the girls' softball game. You got to listen to people. You got to go to all the booster events. You got to listen to people even when they're tearing you down. It's as you as a head coach know, when things aren't going good, everybody's got something negative to say to you. And if you're not careful, you build a force shield around you that people can't get in. And sooner or later, they don't want you around anymore. So you just have to, okay, man, give it to me. I'll deal with it. So those are things you learn along the way. But the biggest lesson was overpromise, overdeliver, create a vision, sell the kids are going to win, find the good. You got to go out of your way to find the good, catch your players doing something right, catch your coaches doing something right. Only correct the critical, only fix the fixable. Here's a big lesson I learned. Sarcastic sense of humor works when coaching O-line, does not work as a head coach. They don't think it's funny, and it doesn't. There's better ways to get your point across. So that was the biggest thing. Stay the course and keep the faith. And there were days where, I thought, God, why'd you bring me here to fail? And I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. And, I would say this. The mistake I made is my wife was my only sounding board. I think every coach should have a mentor that they could call on the phone and sound. So your wife isn't the only person getting the negative part of you, because I could be negative in the morning. And, one benefit of BMI is you walk to work. But I would go walk into work and I would say, okay, before I walk in the store, I got to be the most positive sucker. Because if I'm not positive, my assistants aren't going to be positive. My players won't be positive. The fundraisers won't be positive. And, when you're losing,
That's hard.
you can feel the wave of negative energy come down from the sideline when a bad play happens. You have to have a mantra that when those bad plays happen, that you can change the feeling. And you got to have a core values and a culture that you can drive on the sideline to change when the negative energy waves down from the sideline. So those are key lessons I've learned. And I think in building a program at a military school. And again, there's a lot of guys doing a great job of it right now. And I think Ashley Ingram's going to be the next great one to do it. I'm excited to see what he'll do at VMI.
Yeah, I think you make a lot of great points. And again, actually, when you were talking about, you think of Air Force, Navy, Army. I mean, I'm 40 in my lifetime, and how many consistent years they've had of success. It's actually really impressive when you talk of all those programs over the years. I love your point about, kind of that coaching continuity too, because I feel like, in the coaching world, whether it doesn't matter what sport you coach, people I think know that, but on the outside, I don't think people realize that, the continuity of staff and team members is so key. The more you can do that, obviously, the more success you can have with everybody knowing what the plan is. I mean, how much did the, overall time there, how much did that really challenge you? I mean, in basically those 7 years, 8 years that you were there, how much do you feel like you became out a better person because of what you're talking about, right? Like, hey, things aren't going well, but I got to go in this door. And I appreciate you being vulnerable, because I think so many times it's so easy to see people on the outside be like, well, you just got to be positive and you just got to be this and that. And it's like, yes, correct. But also when things aren't going well, it's not always easy to do that.
Yeah, I was there 8 years. It was very challenging. And as you brought up earlier, Marcus, I wasn't at the easiest place as a coach. Arkansas is a difficult place to coach. Coach Hatfield did a great job there. Utah State was not a winning program when we got there. So that was a difficult job. Rice, obviously, very challenging. As you look at their record, going from Rice to Liberty, they were not very good when Danny Rocco got there, and we turned it around there. The Washington Redskins did not have a great year the year I was there. They haven't had many great years, really, other than the Joe Gibbs era. And then the University of Virginia, it's been up and down, and, we were more down than up when I was there, but we had the one good year. So I was prepared to go through those ebbs and flows, but not as a head coach. And as a head coach, it's much more difficult, and it's just challenging. You have to have, I think, I don't know how coaches do it, head coaches that don't have a strong faith in God. I think you have to know that you were called into the profession. I think you have to pray. But again, I got up 3, 4 in the morning and, was raring and ready to go because I thought I had an answer. I had a vision. I knew that we could get it done. But I would get up and, go walk around the track because it was still dark outside. And I would listen to Christian music to get me energized and positive. But I would be praying and I'd be yelling at God on that track. I'm glad everybody was sleeping. Again, just things like you got to be kidding me. How can this happen? Because we lost some games in the most bizarre. Like we were the best team in the country at snatching defeat out of the jaws of victory. I mean, because we had opportunity after opportunity to have winning seasons before we finally broke through. But again, hire great assistants, have a plan for when they leave, recruit great players, do your best to develop them, retain them, and then empower them. And, that was one of the best things I learned as a head coach is hire a great offensive coordinator, let him call plays, let a defensive coordinator call plays. I spent most of my time on special teams towards the end there. And I spent the vast majority of time in recruiting because I think recruiting is the one thing nobody gets into be coaching because I say, I can't wait to get on the road and go recruit. So as a head coach, you have got to be the best evaluator of talent and recruiting. And again, I think Gary Patterson's a great evaluator of talent. I also think Kirk Cignetti is head and shoulders above as an evaluator of talent. What he did at Indiana that fast with 2 and 3 star kids, he can see something on tape that others don't. And guys are lazy because they don't like watching video. They like watching highlight tapes. They don't like staying and watching the whole practice. And you've been there. Guy comes to watch practice. He spends his whole time, talking to the assistant coach from another school there to watch practice instead of evaluating the talent. So I think talent evaluation is huge. And I think that was one of my stronger suits as a head coach. I think I'm
No,
answering your question.
yeah, no, when you mention that too, it's funny, in the basketball scene, there's always kind of been the inner joke of, you can see an AAU tournament when there's the live period for scholarship schools and all the coaches are around the court and they're all sitting on their phone. They're not actually watching the game and evaluating
Yeah.
the talent. So that's spot on. And, I know it's a Fire Coaches podcast and we obviously talked about, some of these opportunities where, Redskins and Rice when kind of everything came to an end there. But you also had a phenomenal spring season in 2021. As I mentioned earlier to start the show, the Eddie Robinson Coach of the Year. You won the SoCon for the first time. I think it was like in 43 years. You made the FCS playoffs. Talking about Kirk Cignetti, you played that James Madison team and lost by 7. I mean, talk about as much of a struggle as it might have been at a school like VMI. What was that season like? Because again, you come off of COVID, there's a lot of changes in the world, but to have that year and have that type of success, I mean, what was that like for you?
COVID was tough. I knew I had my best team ever going into that season, and I wanted to play the season no matter what. And I didn't feel like my other coaches were unpaged. And so I was constantly on phone calls trying to recruit other coaches to get in pace. Like, hey, like I didn't want to wear a mask. I did not want to get vaccinated. But I wanted to coach and I wanted to coach during the season. So I went and got a vaccine and I put a mask on to coach. And I was going to do everything it took to put a team on the field because I felt we owed it to the players. The players at that time, we didn't know they were going to get another year back from the NCAA. They got 5 years to play for. They only got 44 guaranteed games in their career. We're going to take an opportunity to play football away from them. So to me, I felt I owed it to my players to do everything in my power to put together a team. It was difficult. VMI, we had 24 showers in the locker room. So we can only shower 24 players at a time. We can only have 24 players in the locker room at a time. So that means we had to cut practice shorter so we could shower in 4 waves. You constantly made decisions to do that. But, our kids never wavered. We had a kid, Connor Riddle, who was going to graduate in January. And when they decided to move the season to the spring, I had Connor in my office. I asked his mom and dad to drive down. I said, look, we'll put you on. He was a walk-on too. That we put on half. I said, look, we're going to put you on full scholarship. If you want to play in the spring, and I'm not sure we're going to play in the spring. They're just saying we're going to play in the spring. You can drop out, play graduation, come back because VMI, there were no graduate school. And he did that. And he came back and, that kid, he's the reason we beat Citadel that last game to win the championship game. He had like 15 tackles. And man, those kind of memories just last forever, those kind of kids. But it was difficult. from a non-football standpoint, and you had to get every 2-3 days you're getting tested for COVID. Notes. It was crazy, and as you look back on it now, all unwarranted. But really hard too is Reese Udinsky tore his ACL in the game against Sanford that year, and Seth Morgan came in and quarterback and did a great job. But the biggest accomplishment was the next year, going 6-5, and really should have been 7-4 and going to the playoffs, but for a bad call in Furman on a play that was obviously a touchdown, that was not ruled that. And the reason I say it's obviously a touchdown is I interviewed for the ETSU head coaching job. As the first question the AD asked me, how'd you deal with that blown call at Furman on that touchdown catch that cost you guys a second playoff opportunity? So, yeah, but here's what I'll tell every coach out there. If you're at a program that's losing and you're going through all those defeats, it's amazing how great victory tastes. And it did. Those victories were like, wow, all this hard work is really, really worth it. And I'll relate it to a story I had in Colorado. When I was in Colorado, we won a game over, I forget who it was, but all the staff was down in the dumps and not me. I was celebrating because I just come from 3-8 Arkansas. Like, wow, we won. Awesome. And they go, oh, no, that's a win-lose. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, wait till Sunday in the staff meeting. You'll understand that was a win-lose. We should have won that game in a much better fashion. So I think you have to enjoy victory. And I think when you're on a losing program, you learn how to do that.
Yeah, no, I love that. Do you think, not to keep delaying on this or laboring on this point here, do you think that, the way you guys were structured at VMI, that having all the chaos and crap and everything that COVID was, do you feel like that helped you guys? Because again, everybody else maybe didn't have this structure or, a different team camaraderie culture, whatever you want to call it, that you feel like maybe that helped you because your guys were like, well, whatever, like we're already kind of structured to be, very, very structured in our day to day.
Absolutely. At VMI, players are trained to deal with the diversity from day one. And I thought that helped us. That's why I say the more impressive season to me was the next year, during the regular fall where we went 6-5 and, really should have been 7-4. But yes, I think the training at VMI, gave us the ability to achieve. Plus, I think our players were higher motivated to play, where some others weren't. Now, I do think ETSU and Randy Sanders did a tremendous job of getting their team ready. And again, that was another thing that our motto during that year was so what, now what? And I really got excited when I heard Randy Sanders say his ETSU team was so what, now what as well. And so what, now what? Let's go play. We want to play football. We're football players. We're football coaches. So what, now what? Let's roll.
Yeah. And so you stepped away November of 22. What all kind of went into that decision to kind of step away? And I guess, do you miss it? Where things are at right now? Obviously, we were kind of talking off air. Obviously, you got some family and things like that, and you're having fun, catching up with them and touring different places, which you obviously didn't get a ton of a chance to do when you were coaching. But what do you miss, and what all kind of went through the decision to step down in 22?
Well, a lot went into that decision. The last year was there. We weren't as successful. We had a lot of injuries on defense. We were a defense heavy team that year. Our best part of our team was going to be defense, but our top 5 players got hurt by about game 3. And, at VMI, you can't lose 5 players and be as effective, win-loss column. As the season was going, I was still getting up early and walking and praying. I was going through Hebrews and, just God put in my heart, do you really live faith family football, or is your priorities different? And, I kind of said, I kind of really live football family faith. And so, I felt God telling me, hey, you willing to give that up? And as I was walking around, it wasn't a one-day decision, but I was walking around, I said, you know what, God, I am willing to give that up. And there was things going on. As you said, I had a unique life. At 17 years old, I went to the Air Force Academy. That's not the easiest college to attend. Coaching, the Air Force is a difficult journey to go through. The tough part with pilot training, the first thing I ever failed at in my life that I gave my best. That was a tough, period to recover from. Coaching's a difficult journey as in its own. And when you go to programs that aren't historic winners, it's tougher. And, VMI was hard. And the type of person I am, so highly competitive, I make it harder for myself. So I was tired. I was worn out. I knew I was done at VMI. Knew I was not the best head coach to lead VMI into the future. And my health was great, but I wasn't feeling good. I had no health issues, but I wasn't feeling good. So I just felt it was time for me to step away for the good of the program. I wasn't sure if I'd ever coach again or not. I wasn't sure if I'd coach again that next year. I had offers to coach, just none of them was something I really wanted to do. So, because of God, because, of other things, I decided to step away and, kind of see what happened from there. And I wanted to do it at a time because we had 15 commitments. I thought we had a really good football team for the next year. I wanted my assistants to have the maximum time to get the next job. I wanted VMI to be able to hire a really good football coach and be able to, build on the success we had, because I thought next year's team would be good. And it worked out great. All my assistants got jobs. Danny Rocco got to be the head coach at VMI. They won 5 games that year with that team. 5 of those players that were hurt the year before ended up getting FBS football scholarships and were able to transfer. And so it was great timing, I think, for everybody involved. Did I miss it? Yeah, the first 2 years I really missed it. I would check Football Scoop. Jobs would come open. I go, I could get for that one. I actually interviewed for the head coaching job at Mercer before they hired the guy they did, who did a great job there. They did a tremendous job in hiring him. But this year is the first year that I really don't miss it at all. I don't want to be on the road recruiting like you have to recruit. I maybe miss the NFL, the football part of it, and the relationship that you have with players and coaches. But the other things that you have to do is tough. And I think better suited for younger men, unless you're at a big time program. Like I think, Kurt Cignetti at 63 is different at Indiana than Scott Wachenheim at 63 at VMI, just because of the help you have to do your job. And you can do the things at Indiana that you truly, truly enjoy doing as a head coach, where at VMI, you have to do the things as a head coach that you don't enjoy doing, because in order to keep your assistants happy, you have to let them do what they want to do. And then you have to fill in into the roles where you don't have support staff to do those things. That's all the things that led into that decision to do that. Like I said, my son coaches. I go watch. First year he was at Towson in Northwestern State. I watched all 15 spring practices at both schools. This year when I went and visited him, I only watched 5 practices at Northwestern State. One being the spring game, and uh, you know, I'm not going to see him again this summer until after training camp's over. So, where last summer I went to watch training camp. So no, I don't miss it like I used to. I do enjoy watching, the best of the best play on Saturdays and Sundays, but that's about it.
No, that's great to hear. And I mean, again, catching up on family time. I know you got a growing family and everything like that. So that's awesome to see, you traveling around the country and things like that. I guess, just being out of it now, is there anything you do to get better just as a person? Whether that's, we always talk about whether it's books or podcasts or things. I mean, even, a lot of people talk about just having coaching conversations with people and just picking the brains of people. Anything that you do, or are you really kind of just like, hey, I'm away from it right now, I'm just spending time with family and kind of traveling the US and things like that?
No, again, I think Randy Sanders said it best. If you have an 80-year lifespan, if you equate it to a football game, you got 4 quarters, and spend the first 20 years of your life working on education. The next 20 years, I'm trying to make it. Then from 40 to 60, you're kind of living out your vision, and then 60 on, you retire. But no, I spend a lot of my time. So I wake up in the morning, I do a Bible study. I did a Bible in the year chronologically last year. This year, I'm going through Psalms, one at a time through Psalms until you get to 119. I break it up a little bit. So I start my day with that. I do some mobility training to try and, stay healthy. I walk at least an hour every day. So, I try and get 14,000 steps
Wow.
in a day. And then I do some strength training after I walk. So I do, and I try to really eat healthy and take care of myself. And I think I'm doing a pretty good job like that. I manage my finances. I'm my own financial manager, so I really get excited about listening to podcasts about finances. And so I try to work on that. And I have a couple people I follow, and then I like to trade in the stock market. I'm not a day trader by any stretch of the imagination, but I do like to find good companies, and then I do like to try up and coming companies, and then that leads to some day tradings. I've been able to be halfway successful in that, which allowed me to retire at 60 years old, which is challenging just for people out there because you don't have medical insurance. there's
Right.
there's a whole nother podcast you could do on that, but but and then my wife and I, so we're always around our grandchildren. Our retirement plan revolves around being around my oldest son, who has 3 grandsons, and then my youngest son, who has 1 grandson, and then seeing our our mom and dads who are in their 80s now, and then having some time for us. But we'll kind of get together and then we'll game plan, so we'll have our little staff meeting, me and my wife, and we'll go, okay, we got the grandson or grandsons today. What are we going to do? What drills are we going to do? When do we come together? When are we going to, divide and conquer? How are we going to make their time with us the best? And we get them, we're blessed enough with our kids, we get them for 2 hours a day when we're visiting them. So that's kind of how I do it. And that gets my coaching excitement out of it. And I do like to watch football. I do like to put some thoughts out on Twitter that I think are X now that I think are pertinent, but I'm not getting a whole lot of follows and likes or, people really liking when I put them out there. So I'm doing less and less of that now. I tried to get into a mentorship deal. I would be really excited about, mentoring coaches, and I tried to get that with Bronco Mendenhall, and, both of us failed. Because again, you work your whole life as an assistant. It's your turn to be the head coach. You want to do it your way. You don't want to really run things by maybe a mentor or not. But I think a guy that's out of coaching, that's older, that's willing to talk to you, I think could be very valuable. I know I did that. I know, Pat Fitzgerald gave me a lot of great ideas on how to coach. Bronco Mendenhall, a lot of great ideas how to coach, and talking with those guys, calling Coach Hatfield, and talking to him at least once a month, when I was coaching was huge and helpful. So I do think, having mentors and many mentors is helpful. And, I'm willing to be that for somebody out there that, would really want ones. If there's a head coach out there that needs a mentor, and reach out to me on X, and if it works out for the both of us, great. But that's how I kind of stay
Yeah.
busy. And it's amazing how fast the day goes. Oh, the other thing I like to do is, I like to cook. And, not that I'm some great chef. I'm not, definitely still at the amateur level, but I enjoy going to the food store and shopping and cooking a good meal for my wife and I. So those are things I keep myself busy with. I did play pickleball for a while. And once I started to get good, I had to stop because I was getting too competitive. And, God was telling me, look, you're going down that road again. You don't need to do that. I do not like the golf. I know Randy likes the golf, but it's too frustrating a game for me. But that's what I do, Marcus. It works for me. And unless God, puts something in me, I pray every day, hey, God, if there's something you want me to do, give it to me, because I'm willing to go do it. So
No, I love that. I love to hear about the mentorship thing too. It's actually something I want to do to, some smaller Division III assistant coaches, younger guys who have been in it for a few years. And even if it's gathering 3 or 5 of them and just meeting once a month to just talk about different topics or things like that, also making them realize like, hey, I know when you're a younger coach, I actually just saw this on Twitter the other day. Somebody had Luke Falk, I think it was, who's a former quarterback at Washington State from Mike Leach. I've been following him, and he put something out the other day about how when he went to this, I don't know if it was the combine, it was some type of event that he was at. And he said he met with Kevin O'Connell. He met with all these guys who are now head coaches, who at the time were either assistants or quality control guys. And he didn't give them the type of, he said, I didn't disrespect them, but I didn't give them the type of attention that I was trying to give to head coaches. Now he's like, I realize years later that those guys are going to be head coaches. And so I think part of what I want to do is to be able to give, assistants at even the Division III level that are in basketball, just understanding like, hey, if you guys can kind of come together and meet each other, and maybe if you're in different states, like eventually, if you guys stay in it, you're going to progress into assistant coaches, associate head coaches, and kind of create your own little network as well too.
great wisdom, Marcus. So I'll give you a story. I'm a second lieutenant coach at the Air Force Academy. The assistant SID is Mike Bone, and Mike Bone goes on to be the AD at USC, amongst other
Yeah,
jobs.
since Cincinnati before that, I think.
Yeah, Cincinnati, San Diego State. I didn't give Mike Bone, more than 2 seconds of my time. I thought I was above Mike Bone as a former player. Stupidest thing I ever did. I mean, you're spot on. It's amazing. Tom Herman, I did the right thing by him. When I was at Rice, Tom was a GA at Texas, and at Sam Houston State as the lowest paid coach. I remember going to clinics and being with Tom, and, I would always, when we'd go out afterwards, I'd buy the beer or, whatever we were having, a Coke, and I think that's the right thing to do. I learned it. You never know who's going to be the next head coach and where they come from, and how fast they're going to rise. And you try to be your best to all people, and treat all people the way you're supposed to be treated and the way you would like to be treated. So I hear you. That's great wisdom, Marcus.
Yeah, well, Scott, I appreciate you sitting down again, hearing about your journey. Definitely went the hard way with all the places you were at, and the experiences and type of results and things like that. I just love hearing it. So honestly, I appreciate you joining before a long holiday weekend here.
No, I appreciate you having me on the show, Marcus. Love what you're doing. I wish you all the best with the podcast. I think, I don't know, I think there's a need for coaching podcasts that look a little bit beyond the X's and O's of the sport.
No, I appreciate it. Well, have a great weekend.
All right, you too.